Okay, thanks. Well, I'll take it away. And again, I'm Christine West. I'm an architect and one of the two principals of KITE Architects. My business partner, Albert Garcia, and most of our firm is online with us today as well. I'll give Brigida a chance to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Brigida. I've been working at KITE for about 2.5 years. I'm an architectural designer and project manager.
Right. Well, thank you so much for the platform to kind of share our work. We were really honored that House of Hope came to us with this idea. And I'm going to share my screen in a moment here. In terms of ways to help, we do have some expertise around that. And I feel like we sometimes can think about things a little differently. And if the goal here is to be innovative and find a way to make homes better, that are more affordable, that are more easily deployed, but also better at serving this very vulnerable population, we're all in. And what I want to share with you today is to kind of give you an insight into how we think about this design problem, because a lot of people don't know what kind of happens behind the scenes at an architecture firm. So with that, I'm going to, I think I can share my screen, right?
You
Yes,
should
here
have
we go.
access.
Fantastic. There we go. Okay, so the name Kintsugi Place came from Laura and her team, and when we heard that, it's like, oh, that is just beautiful. So those of you not in the know already, Kintsugi is the golden repair and the art of repairing broken pottery in a way that embraces the scars, shows those scars, and makes a whole that is more beautiful than perhaps when they started with. So we were all in on that concept, and the tiny homes is something that we had been actually exploring for a private client. So we were intrigued by the architectural possibilities, but the other thing that it tapped into was some work that we have been really diving into, especially during this past COVID time. But that is a look at a human-centered design in an architectural context, and for this, that means basically taking a look at the research that's out there in neuroscience, in cognitive and behavioral science, and making a link to design solutions that support us as humans in our world. So this is an approach to architecture that is not necessarily style-based. It really responds to how we as humans interact with our world and how that world supports us. So obviously there's a crisis. This was an article just this last week, really kind of highlighting how the homelessness problem has exploded. So we're dealing with that crisis on the front lines. We're trying to help with a slightly longer term version of this. Will hopefully be a much more permanent solution. But I think everybody's aware of the challenge. If you're in anywhere near the construction industry, it takes time. It is a very slow and long process. Construction is just a part of the battle. Finding that land, finding the zoning is a real issue. And then even if you find that perfect site, I want to say the stigma around homelessness is real. I think a lot of really good-hearted people, who do want to help, who donate their money and their time, are still maybe have that reaction when they see somebody who hasn't washed, who has all their belongings with them. The situation of being homeless compounds those things, so that and it's not just that stigma. There's a real, from everything that we're reading, a loss of sense of self, and so homes have a much more significant place in us than just shelter, and that's where the name comes from. So this is a popular thing that goes around the internet. It actually is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it goes back over 100 years. And it's interesting because it does kind of set apart needs in a very easy to understand way. At the baseline, we have physiological needs, so basic shelter and clothing, air and water, and then gets into safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. It's interesting because it's really nice way to be able to categorize kind of things. But it has not been a canon, and I'm not a social scientist, I'm an architect. And thinking about this, one of the basic principles behind this is that it says that you cannot reach these higher tiers of safety or love and belonging, let alone self-actualization, until you completely address everything at the bottom line. So what that means is that shelter is it. It's not a home. And I want to talk about the difference between shelter and a home. And what I worry about is that the way we've set up our systems of dealing with people facing homelessness is that it doesn't treat them as whole beings, because it just says, well, let me get you shelter and food and then you'll be okay. And then we'll worry about the other stuff later. It's like, no, I think we need to, and I see Lauren nodding your head, we need to treat people as that whole person. So this is a little diagram just showing, let's just think about all this as one. We need to deliver on all these fronts if we're going to make an impact in this community. So an evidence of that is the success of programs like art therapy, right? If you follow that hierarchy, right, art is way up at the top in terms of your agency, your ability to express yourself. Yet we find that art therapy can be incredibly effective at helping people deal with trauma, at kind of engage with others and have a sense of control over their own circumstances and also express themselves. So that's my exhibit A in terms of why I kind of want to debunk Maslow's hierarchy. So this brings us to some of the research and kind of literature review we've been doing around these human-centered design. I wanted to share this quote. I'll read this, and then I have a longer passage that really drives home. This book, Welcome to Your World, and as far as I'm concerned, it is the most revolutionary book to come out in a decade, if not more, about the impact of architecture and our built environment on us. It's a very well-researched and detailed book, tying all these cognitive and behavioral science studies back to the design world. One of the studies that the author, Sarah Williams Goldhagen, quotes indicates that people with stronger attachment to places, and place being a physical location that has meaning, people with stronger attachment to places and enjoy enhanced sense of well-being, stronger community ties, and a greater ability to transcend their own self-interests and conceptions and see others' points of view. So think about that for a minute. A place makes you a better citizen. It makes you a better human. It makes you better equipped to deal with this in a collective. So while you're thinking about that, I want to read a slightly longer passage that does reference some sort of way of looking about how humans operate in the world. So you'll hear the word prospecting, and that just means kind of our natural tendency to go out and discover, explore, and find information to kind of feed our needs. So by complete coincidence, I was looking for a quote to support this, and the way it starts out is going to sound familiar because it's the title of our topic here today. So again, this is from Sarah Williams Goldhagen's book. A home offers much more than shelter. It centers us and our family members literally in psychology. After a long day or a long journey, it is to a home that we eventually return. Rebecca Solnit writes that home is the place where you are the point of intersection of all the lines drawn through all the stars. And if our evolutionary heritage mandates that we prospect where we can, that's that term, it also ensures that we take safe refuge, if not in reality, then certainly in our imaginations at home. As action settings, homes afford us a wide-ranging but restricted set of activities and states of mind. Refuge from our prospecting, orderliness, freedom, sociability, and privacy. We enjoy more autonomy, more control over our surroundings at home than we do anywhere else. We are free to shape and decorate the environment, to establish routines and break them, to be ourselves alone or with others. As we've seen, that sense of autonomy is fundamental to our health and well-being. When a home fails to provide any or all of these qualities, its inhabitants, especially if they're children, suffer. There are acute and lasting developmental, cognitive, and psychological consequences. Now, again, we can share the link to that book. It's a treasure trove of ideas. But so when back to House of Hope, when they approached us, they say, well, yes, we believe in this mission, and this transcends not just the homeless population, but all of us, really, in a wide range of work. And one of the things that we have been reflecting on through the COVID times, this is us in our office in the before times, is that, we're all working from home, and we're trying to figure out, well, what makes an office special? Why is that important? And one of the things that Phil in our office hit upon is like, you know what? If you go into the office, it feels like you belong somewhere. Like if otherwise, what does it matter who you're working for, what you're doing? That sense of belonging that a place and a sense of identity that a place affords is really palpable to all of us, I think. So as we began this project, I think, their expectation was like, oh, we need tiny homes. Can you draw them up for us? It's like, okay, let's put on the brakes here. We said, well, let's tell us the goals. Let's talk about what we want out of this place. And so they had their summer interns doing these great conversations, and they gave us the full undigested data of all the feedback that they got. And we started to pull out a number of themes and patterns. And this word cloud comes from those themes around security, not only, violence, but and trauma, but also just having a sense of protection of yourself and your belongings. Agency, meaning that you have control over what happens in your life. Privacy, and that's a huge thing, especially in dealing with vulnerable populations. And we'll get into that much more. And then identity, as we were just talking about, it's important to everybody. So see here, so next step was like, okay, well, what are other people doing? What is, the concept that's out there? And so there are a lot of initiatives out there that are starting to figure this out. What are the ones we like and what are the ones we don't do? This tiny house village, these are some adorable kind of uses, some adorable little homes, and I think this like sort of like, hey, some other people are doing this. What other models? This is not so great. It's better again than a lot of situations, but we're like, this helped highlight, well, what don't we want out of this facility? Is this situation giving us anything more than protection from the weather? And how is it supporting that sense of agency, security? So we're like, yeah, I think we need to do a little better than that. We found this project, which is pretty famous. It's a lovely project. Apparently, it's very successful, very well run, and it was easy to put up. It's a very affordable, quickly produced solution. And our issue with this as permanent supportive housing, it was kind of missing that one thing that we saw as a value, and that's the privacy aspect. It definitely is a community-based solution. You have a front porch and you are part of this. We didn't feel like it was doing enough to have that sense of solace and that place where you can really collect your own thoughts, especially in the outdoors. And then, of course, there's all the tiny houses that are the luxury market, so, this is a bit more of a high end because obviously you have to own acres of land. There's utility costs or investment in renewables that have to be made. I think for us, this highlighted the importance of outdoor places as well as indoor places and showed some very simple and easy to construct methods that are important for the affordability aspect of it. But I think we also have an eye out to, well, let's not, make this a boutique or a one-off thing. Let's think about how to make this practical and available to be built in a community. So beyond the tiny homes themselves, the community aspect and the kind of services that House of Hope provides is important. So we worked with them to develop this set of things beyond the home, a community center that would have a great room, laundry office, private office, outdoor space, including a garden, places to get exercise, walking areas, and then a garden building, for all those rakes and shovels, but also, if you have a complex, the maintenance things that you might need. So I'm going to turn things over to Brigida to show how our thoughts around the context, the site, and the prototype model, and then I'll take it back over and talk about where we go from here.
Thanks, Christine. So we looked at kind of a mixed use site where it would be commercial at the front and then lead into some residential. We thought about how sound would travel on that site and how privacy would work. So we placed the main buildings towards the front of the site to kind of act as a buffer and shelter the neighborhood from that main road. And then the entry would come from that main road and then circle through this site. And then on the next slide. So when we were thinking about how the site would look, looking at those typical tiny villages where all of the houses face one another, as Christine said, was missing that sense of solace and having your own space. So we went back to the concept of kintsugi and that gold repair and mending the pieces. So we have winding paths throughout the site that really bring all of the program together. And so on the next slide, you'll see how all the buildings are turned and shifted so that everyone has their own entry and their own outdoor space. And that was really important, that everyone had their own space to be private, as well as that option to be a part of the community space. And all of the houses are facing towards that community lawn, but also sheltered from the main road. So this is our plan for the Kintsugi Place. Thinking about the entrance, we wanted to pull that back so that there was this sense of your own front door, and it was a little bit private. We have a slat wall along that entrance, and so the people who live here can leave a flower pot on the porch or a bench, and it really brings that sense of this is my home. And then going from there, this is about a 420 square foot home for either a single or a couple. We really wanted to have a private bedroom in this unit so that if someone had a guest, they wouldn't necessarily be sitting in their bedroom. And so looking at this plan, we really, other than thinking about the efficiency of the space, we were thinking about the energy efficiency. So locating windows so there would be cross ventilation was really important, and the openness of the space. We'd also have mechanical in the attic, some mini splits, and then the outdoor space. And so we have, again, the slat wall at the rear so that when people are sitting on their back porch, they're not looking at their neighbors directly. And yeah. So on the next slide, yep. You see again those front entrances, and that change in material there is really the sense of a prime. So people will be directed to that warmth and that knowledge that this is my entrance, this is my spot. Another thing with these houses, they would be sitting on pier footings. They'd be modular buildings made with SIPS panels. We also would like to add solar panels to each property to really push that energy efficiency. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, no, I know some people had questions about zoning, and here's where we get a little hairy. And is Bonnie still going to be joining us to round out the program?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So we'll let her address some of that. So when I'm not doing my day job as an architect, I volunteer in the City Plan Commission for Providence. And so if I probably know a little bit more about zoning than the average person. But I will say, once we started looking at, so we started looking in kind of House of Hope's home turf in Warwick and Cranston, and say, well, where could we put this? And our first look was like, well, nowhere. And then we looked harder. I was like, no, really, nowhere. Like there is literally no piece of land that's zoned properly that could hold this. And I think everybody's, in a sense of heightened awareness around some of the structures that our society has that separates people by race, by income, by socioeconomic status. And we're really, as a society, just starting to wake up to the impact of exclusionary zoning. And I think this is something that is our next big challenge that we all have to wrestle with. And I don't want to pick on Warwick specifically. Every community in Rhode Island and our country really has this in some form or the other. But the whole notion of separating single family zones and minimum lot sizes really reinforces wealth and the ability of homeownership. And so communities in Rhode Island, almost all of them have very severe restrictions on multifamily apartment buildings. So what we found is if a parcel was zoned multifamily, it basically already had an apartment building on it. Rental is usually the most approachable form of residence for people. Cost of housing is only going up in terms of a purchase price. So we sort of decided to broaden our aspect, and I have no doubt that if we found a good piece of land that the officials of Warwick would understand what we were trying to do and make accommodations. We did have that conversation with people at Providence, and they very graciously have offered to help. And one of our initiatives at CPC is going to be examining, like, what can we do to make our zoning more flexible, more accommodating of clusters? Because even in Providence, which does have much more opportunities for multifamily, it's a much more progressive zoning. I'm very proud of how we changed our zoning in 2014 to allow a greater range of housing, to enable more development, which will increase the supply of housing at all income levels. But we still have some work to do, because that tiny cluster that we looked at is technically not multifamily. It's technically not single family. So there's some legal hoops that we have to jump through in order to make that work. And like I said, we had already been looking at this from a market perspective. So it's not just House of Hope that's looking at it. I think there's a lot of people who would love to own their own homes and be part of a community like this. And it's a way to take that sense of home and home ownership and make it a very compact and more sustainable kind of way to live. So I'm really optimistic about the future. We have been looking at how that model, which is more of a inner suburb kind of site density, and make that a more of an urban level. Some of those things would be bringing the houses towards the street front, so there's a very clear street side and backyard side. Rotating the gables so it emulates, the kind of pattern that we see in Providence with multiple kind of Victorian peaks, facing the road. Still making enough space for parking for staff. Even if there is street parking, safe place for gardening. And so we're just starting that efforts now, and we're optimistic that we will ultimately find a home for these little homes. So I'm going to wrap it up there. And if there's any questions specifically for us, happy to take those, or we can go right into Bonnie's presentation.
Thank you so much for this project. I'm in awe. I love it. And I'm especially grateful that you're not doing what so many tiny homes do, where they put the bed above the kitchen, the bathroom, with, a ladder or swing to get into it.
Yeah, well, thanks for pointing that out. I think a lot of those precedents they assume that you're a completely healthy 20-year-old who not only has full use of their limbs, but has the energy and not enough creaks and groans to get into a space like that. And I think we need to keep mindful of physical equity as well as social equity with these projects.
Yeah. And then Toonie had a question about talking about the kind of the automobile versus public transit, and how that plays into what you're looking to do.
Yeah, well, it's really important that these are located near transit corridors. That also limits to some extent. The city of Providence does have a transit-oriented development overlay zone, which is helpful along those lines. The site plan that Brigida was showing us before, we envisioned that this could even be, say, redeveloped on a parking lot, which might be on an abandoned commercial corridor. I think we all know streets that have just acres and acres of asphalt that seems to be empty. So how would we transform that into someplace that's green and inviting and still sheltered from that busy traffic corridor? This particular site plan does have room for car ownership. But most cities do, and Providence now does have overnight parking. And so putting the humans first and thinking about parking secondary is kind of where we've landed on the parking question.
Excellent. And then from Douglas, we have a question about the panels in the construction. Are these homes prefabricated to speed up the development? And
that's the idea. Either somewhere along the spectrum of prefabrication. We have a lot of carpenters. Stick framing is actually quite fast in New England, but you can get some efficiencies using SIPS panels. Truly modular construction, where more of it is put in. What we have found with the modular construction is that there is still a fair amount of finishing that needs to happen. So if you think about a house rolling down the highway, drywall, gypsum board doesn't do so well, it cracks. There's final plumbing connections. Modular doesn't solve everything. There's still quite a bit of work to be done on site. But I think every penny counts with this. So, the panels that you're seeing are solar panels. The idea would be these would be as independent from the grid as possible. Again, taking advantage of every, kind of passive house technique and sustainable energy trick in the book to make these affordable to operate as well as to build.